Good to see so many of our international students being able to join us for the last webinar we're going to have, maybe for this 7-day period. So I'm Amanda Kim. I'm the Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion. I know that a number of you had a chance to join one of the other sessions, either on Sunday or earlier tonight or in the morning, whatever time zone you may be in, and wherever you may be at. And I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Lori White, our 21st president of DePauw University, who would like to just say a few words.
Hello, everyone, and thank you again for making the time to join us, maybe for the first time on this webinar, or perhaps you have, as Dr. Kim said, attended one of the other webinars. It's really great to see you, and I can only imagine how challenging these last 6 months have been for our international students, from the upheaval in the spring, when so many of your classmates left the campus, and many of you had to stay here in residence because you couldn't go home. I can only imagine how tough that was and how lonely it's probably been for you on campus. And then there are all the changing federal regulations. And we have also bombarded you with lots of information. And so what we like to do is create a space and time to answer questions specific to your status as an international student, and just want you to know that we are so glad that you are here. We are so glad that you have chosen DePauw for your education, and I want you to know that I really am looking forward to the opportunity to personally connect with you. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues who are going to introduce themselves, and then we will open up the floor for your questions.
I'm not sure we have an order here, so I will jump in. My name is Dave Burke. I teach computer science. I'm our Vice President for Academic Affairs, and I'll be happy to try to help if any academic questions come up tonight.
Hi, my name is Stevie Baker Watson. I work with campus wellness and athletics. So I also interface with a number of you as it relates to immunization and insurance. And if there's any questions that I can help you with this evening, I'm happy to do so.
I'll jump in. I'm Julia Proctor. I'm Associate Dean of Students, and for the last several months have been chairing our COVID-19 task force. I recognize some of the names we're already seeing in the chat as some of our student leaders that I have had the opportunity to work with over the past few years in your student leadership positions with our student organizations.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alan Hill, Vice President for Student Academic Life and Dean of Students. And I look forward to answering any questions related to the student academic life side of the house, and any Greek student questions as well.
Okay, and so before I turn it over to my wonderful colleagues, Luffy and Joanna, who many of you have been working with since you started at DePauw. I just wanted to preface our time, our time together with just recognizing that many of you have already communicated to us about the trying conditions of the pandemic and the situation that you're finding yourselves in, where some decisions have been made based on prior information that was shared with you, and even with the new information that's come out, that some of you are having difficulties understanding or accepting how things are going to work with regard to how you're going to, the logistics of returning to campus, or the logistics of air travel, and how you're going to get from the airport to campus, and all of those nuances that are so important to having a smooth pathway with, if you're going to be returning to campus, and if you're not returning to campus, whether that is good news or whether that is not what you wanted to hear, that it might be equally precarious and challenging, even not returning to campus and to study remotely. Through no matter what your circumstances are, all of us are on this call because we want to support you in being successful with your academics, no matter where you are or what you're struggling with. And so even though we may not be able to get to your specific question or concern, please know that you could reach out to any one of us, and we want to hear and know what your struggles are so that we can help to find solutions and options that's going to work for you. And with that, I will turn it over to Luffy and Ioana.
Hi guys, hi students. It's such a pleasure to see that so many of you have joined us, and I want to thank Dr. White and all my amazing colleagues for joining us today. It really means a lot. I know it means a lot to our students. I'm very thankful that we actually have good news to share, that many of the immigration updates have been positive and they've been well received. We're very thankful that we have clarity. We know what we need to do for our students, and we know what our students need to do to join us back on campus. So I want to share a few updates. The latest updates from the Department of Homeland Security that was issued on July 14th. Updates or guidance rescinded previous guidances that we've had, the July 6th, the July 7th, and these were really bad guidance that we didn't like because they limited the choices for our students. Those guidance, were mentioning that students needed so many online courses or so many, face-to-face courses. So we're very, very thankful that the new guidance goes back to March when, we started the COVID-19 pandemic and all those flexibilities that the Department of Homeland Security showed to our students. So what it means is for our returning students, you can either take fully online courses, or you can take one, in-person or one hybrid course. And as long as you're taking a full course load, you're gonna be fine. So the immigration has been, more flexible than before. And so as long as you're taking your full course load, whether you're taking remote or, you're taking the hybrid, which for DePauw, it's the mix, whether you're taking it, face-to-face with your professor or remotely, you're gonna be fine. What we are doing, because we've seen that there are some discrepancies with the Department of State, with the Customs and Border, we are issuing a support letter to all our students. And that letter, clearly lists the DePauw mode of study for fall semester, and it clearly shows that we're meeting all the requirements and all the guidance, for the Department of Homeland Security. So we're going to be sharing that letter with you, I believe, tomorrow, in addition to an email that me and Ioana are going to be working on. That's really a good news for returning students. Please know that you have flexibility. If you're able to join DePauw, then you're going to be fine. And if you stay remotely at home, and as long as you take, online courses and you take at least 3 credit courses, you're going to be fine. There won't be any issues. Your CVS record will remain active, and you're not going to lose any opportunity to apply for a CPT or apply for OPT. So that's for returning students. For any initial students, these are the first-year international students. If you take online courses, you have to stay home. You're not allowed to apply for a visa if you're taking fully online courses. If you're taking a mix of courses, then you are able to go and apply, for your visa, and you're able to travel and join DePauw University. So these are really the main guidelines that came recently, and that was July the 14th, and then we had an additional FAQ on July 24th. What we want our students to do, in addition to the support letter that we're sending, we want you also to print the new guidance and please carry it with you for your visa appointment if you need a visa, and also as you travel and as you enter the United States. Your first port of entry, you should show your guidance, a copy of the guidance, your support letter, your I-20, your passport, all the documents that you need to travel.
Welcome from me too. It's good to see you all. It's Joanna Saley, Interim Assistant Director of the CDI. We had some pre-submitted questions, so we're going to share first some general information that we've prepared and go through the pre-submitted questions. But after that, you're welcome to also share questions in the chat, and we'll go through them in order of receiving them. I want to start with a more general question that I'm sure many of you know about what are the required travel documents. And I would like to first address what are the basic required travel documents. As always, you need to have your Form I-20 endorsed for travel, signed by a DSO. The travel endorsement is valid for 12 months of your attempted re-entry to the US, and as long as there are no updates to your program. So if you're returning to the US, let's say on September 1st, 2020, and you have a travel endorsement that was placed anytime after September 1st, 2019, you can use it for re-entering the US. Again, as long as there are no changes to your program. Your I-20 shall reflect all of your declared majors, your current funding from DePauw, and your current expected graduation date. If those are not reflected on the I-20 that you have renewed, that is not your most up-to-date I-20, get in touch with us. Due to COVID-19, SCVP has authorized us to issue electronic I-20s. That's why any one of you that contacts us for new I-20 will receive an I-20 scanned to their DePauw email. If you're in a country that you don't have good access to your DePauw email at the moment, you can let us know to send it to another of your personal emails. We'll have to confirm your identity because this is a confidential document, but after that, we'll be able to send it to you. So you need your current I-20 with a valid travel endorsement. You need a current passport valid for at least 6 months after the date of your re-entry, unless you come from one of limited number of countries, and I am going to share a link in our chat where you can check what countries those are. You also need a valid US visa sticker in your passport. This could be in your current valid passport or in an older expired passport, as long as the visa is still valid. You also need proof of financial means and proof of current enrollment. Due to COVID-19, we strongly recommend you have some additional documents with you. As Lucy mentioned, we are going to be issuing a letter for all of you that it will state what kind of program we currently have to make it clear to border officials and US Embassy officials if you're applying for visas. Have that printed letter with you for your visa appointments and on you when you're traveling back to the US. We also strongly recommend that you print the two most current guidances because they state that you can be traveling with an electronic I-20, and they also state why your I-20 remained valid even though you might have left the country before the completion of the spring term. Students who departed the US before the end of the spring term because they were completing their classes remotely or were on a study abroad that might have been closed or might have continued until the end should be ready to answer questions on that. You could expect questions from the CBP officers upon re-entry. So if you have some documents with you or printed communication, that will be helpful. Please also note that all of your immigration records remained active while you were completing your studies remotely, or even though your study abroad location was closed. You should also print out the guidance and it's best if you have also the sections that apply to you highlighted, the sections about electronic issuance of documents, and if you've studied abroad, the one about it and remaining in active status. Next, we would like to address the travel restrictions. As you know, those have been evolving during the summer due to COVID-19. There are currently 5 presidential proclamations that are still in effect that limit travel to US from certain countries. They will continue to be in effect until they're rescinded. Those proclamations impact students who have traveled in the last 14 days before attempting re-entry to the US to certain countries, regardless of whether they're citizens of that country. The affected countries are Brazil, China, Iran. Also, with a little bit amended effect that I'll just mention in a moment, UK, Ireland, and the Schengen area countries. We've shared more information on that in prior communication on July 6th, and the subject line of my email was travel restrictions, immigration regulations, and visa services considerations. I am gonna post a link, not link, but explanation to that. So feel free to access the direct links to the proclamation there. A very important recent development is that all of those proclamations provided for national interest exemptions. In other words, people who might not be covered by the proclamation. And such exemptions are currently in effect for Schengen region, Ireland, and UK. Students who have traveled to those countries, or countries from that region, or Schengen region, and currently have a valid US visa, do not need to apply for an exemption, but automatically get an exemption so they can attempt travel to the US. Students who currently don't have a valid US visa sticker in their passports should check in with their local US embassy to see if they have resumed issuing visa appointments.
I want to talk a little bit about the travel exemptions or restrictions. I would like to encourage students to please check with the US Embassy because everything is evolving. So the Schengen region was previously restricted, meaning that students flying from the Schengen area could not fly directly to the US. They had to go to a non-restricted country. And so we would like to encourage students to please check with the US Embassy. If you're flying from China, we would like the students to please consider flying to a non-restricted country before flying to the US, because flying directly from China to the US is still restricted. So if a student have any, if anybody has any questions, please reach out to me or Ioana, because we absolutely don't want you to be stuck trying to fly directly from China to the US. So even if you have a valid visa right now, that's still travel restriction from China. So things are evolving and we want students to stay in touch with us because we want to give you the latest information. I want to also remind students that your I-20 that you had during the spring semester is still valid. So your I-20 is good as long as you have a travel signature from me or Ioana. Every travel signature is good for 12 months. So as long as you have your travel signature, you absolutely 100% can use your I-20. If your I-20 is not valid, meaning the dates in the I-20 are not, valid anymore, please let us know because we will be able to issue a new I-20 and we can send it to you as a scanned copy and you can print it and take it with you for your travels. I want to talk a little bit about visas and what students should do. So most of our returning students, they usually have a visa of more than 1 year, usually 4 years, some countries 5 years. But our students from Vietnam, they receive a 1-year visa, meaning that our students from Vietnam have to reapply for the visa on a yearly basis. So for our students from Vietnam, we encourage you to please check with US embassies in Hanoi, in Ho Chi Minh City, because what we've heard is that on July 13th, that most US embassies have resumed regular visa routine services. So please check with your embassies near you to see if you can schedule a visa interview. If you need any help, please let us know. We're going to share some links with you so you can check the current visa wait time, and so you can have an idea of what you should be thinking about as far as applying for the visa. But I think Ioana mentioned it, what you need for your visa. If you need to renew your visa, you need all your documents. Please play it safe, take everything with you. If you still have your acceptance letter from DePauw, of course you need a valid I-20, a valid passport that is 6 months valid into the future. You need your financial documents. You need all the documents, including if you can print your class schedule. Be sure to take that as well. And also please take our letter and take all the guidance that Ioana shared in the chat. The other thing I want to share is employment, meaning work study, CPTs, OPTs. So the first thing for students who have a campus job, you are allowed, according to immigration regulation, you can work from outside the United States, but this is going to depend on you working with your employer, your supervisor on campus. If you're allowed to do so, then you can work from outside the United States, but that's something that you have to discuss with the department, with the supervisor that hires you at DePauw University. And what you need to do, you need to make sure to have an official letter from your employer on a DePauw letterhead showing, that you're employed and showing the hours and all the job functions that you do for that position. You must have, that letter with you. It's very, very important. I think Ioana going to share it with you as well. So for curricular practical training, know that for curricular practical training, it has to be any job, any opportunity, any internship that you do outside DePauw University. Please remember that for CPT to be authorized, it has to be either part of your academic program, a required components of your academic program. We have a few courses at DePauw that require a CPT. Some econ courses might require a CPT. But also, if you will receive an extended study credit, then that's another way for you to apply for CPT. Please remember that before engaging in any work outside DePauw, you must talk to me and Ioana. You need to have approval, because consequences for not getting the documentation, having your authorization, can lead to some really bad consequences. So we strongly encourage students to please work with us. Be sure to always communicate with ISS with anything that deals with work, especially work outside DePauw University. You must have authorization. So we have flexibility. Students can engage in CPT from outside the United States. We need 3 requirements to do so. The first is that you're enrolled in a program of study that requires CPT, or if it's a required part of your program, meaning that you have to work with your faculty advisor to have that first part of the authorization. Your advisor has to sign a document. It's part of the CPT packet that we have in ISS. The second important point is that you need to secure a DSO approval. So either me or Ioana, we need to approve your CPT. The third thing is to engage in CPT outside the United States. You must either the employer should have an office outside the United States, or the employer should have a way to assess your progress, your learning progress. So these 3 requirements that I mentioned, that it has to be part of your program, that you secure authorization through ISS, and that the third thing, that your employer either has an office outside the US, or there is a way for the employer to check your progress electronically. So these are 3 important factors to consider. We are more than happy to talk to you one-on-one basis, on a Zoom, via email, if you have any question about CPT. Lastly, for OPT, students can engage in optional practical training. Remember, the optional practical training is that opportunity of 1 or 3 years that you have after you finish your education at DePauw University. So you are able to engage in OPT outside the United States. Again, you need to make sure that the employer is able to approve, you working outside the United States. That's very, very important. And of course, you need to, file everything that you need to do. If you need to apply for OPT, you have to do that from within the US. We're still waiting for some flexibility so that students, if they have to be outside the US, they can apply for OPT, but we are waiting for that guidance. But if you've already secured your OPT, you can be outside the United States and engage in OPT. If for students who decide to stay outside the US and take in online courses, so remember that your CVIS status is going to be active, which means that you're not going to lose any opportunity for a CPT or OPT. And also the 5-month rule does not apply. Because we're keeping your record active, please do not worry about the 5-month rule. Your status is going to be good as long as you're taking full course load during the fall semester. And I think that's the only thing that deals with employment. Can we, Ioana, can we move to questions?
I think we're good to move to questions. So as I mentioned, we had some pre-submitted questions, so we'll go through those. If you haven't had a chance to submit a question, please do after hearing the questions, because we imagine you have similar questions. The first one that we got, we partially addressed already, but I wanted to reiterate. It was about, I forgot to get my travel endorsement. What should I do? Send an email to iss@depauw.edu that you need a travel endorsement. You will get an electronic I-20 and you will get also our DSO letter. Whether you're requesting a new I-20 or not, we'll still send you the DSO letter. Electronic I-20s that you receive will be valid. The travel endorsement will be valid for another 12 months from the moment we place it. The I-20 itself will be valid until you make any changes to your program. So just because, for example, in a few months or a year, COVID-19 is not there anymore, does not mean that we will have to reissue the I-20. That remains a valid I-20 according to the current SAP guidance.
I think the second question, I think it deals with, who have priority to move to campus. My understanding is that first year and sophomore have priority. And I believe that international students who are juniors or senior can apply for an exemption based on their needs and based on government regulation. So we encourage students to please fill out the form that is due on July 31st, and please indicate your preference. And I know that DePauw will work with you. Another question, if I were to take online classes for the fall semester while in the US and graduate in December, would I still be eligible for OPT, or should I take classes on campus? Yes, the student will be eligible for OPT. So as long as the student has completed all the graduation requirements and he or she gonna finish the program on December 20th, 2020, then yes, the student will be eligible to apply for OPT.
Based on travel restrictions and availability of fewer flights, can international students return to campus earlier than other students? Our tentative move-in dates for all students will be between August 24th and 26th, and concrete information on that will be shared by email with everybody that's either a first year, sophomore, new transfer student, or falls within one of the priority categories, for example, being an international student. We do work with some capacity constraints that are dictated by health and safety considerations, but we will try to work with any students whose specific circumstances necessitate being in the US early to try to figure out options. Logistics have made it clear, though, that early move-in earlier than August 10th will not be possible.
Okay. Another question, can I go home mid-semester if my professors are okay with it? So I'm glad in the question that the student is saying that, you know, it means that he or she going to be talking to the professor, and that's absolutely my number one recommendation, to always communicate with your professor so he or she is aware with your plans and what you have to do. You know, God forbid if the university has to pivot in mid-semester and move to remote learning, please know that all the international students are allowed to stay in the US legally, even if they enroll in a full course load online. So that's a good thing for our students. And, you know, lastly, I would say that it will also depend on your mode of classes. If you are taking, you know, your classes to be mixed, I think it would be easier, you know, obviously with the approval of your professor, and, you know, I'm sure Dave Burke will be involved as well. So as long as students, you know, get the approval, and if they're taking, you know, the classes that will enable them to either, you know, be in the class or outside the class, I think it could be possible. But communication going to be key.
Next question was, if I have a study abroad for spring and I take classes remotely outside of the US for the fall, how will my visa status be affected? The situation with COVID-19 in the US and internationally is constantly evolving. So first and foremost, it's really important for you to follow the university communication on decisions about fall and spring 2020 and availability of study abroad options. You should also be thinking of Plan B if due to COVID-19, your study abroad institution communicates no longer offering the study abroad for spring 2020, or in case, for example, due to health and safety recommendations, DePauw doesn't support study abroad. That being said, your status will not be affected in any way by taking only remote classes from outside the US, as long as you're successfully completing the classes and you're otherwise maintaining status.
Next question, if a student is tested before and right after returning to DePauw and the results come negative both times, why do we have to stay in quarantine for 14 days? What does it mean if the tests come back negative? So I'm gonna try to address this question, but my colleague Stevie she's a pro at this, so I'm gonna let her, you know, give the correct answer. But what I know is that we are not discriminating against international students. Everybody gonna be tested. For students in the US, whether they're international or Americans, they have to be tested before joining DePauw, 5 days. And then when they come to campus, I believe 2-3 days. Steve, I'm trying to remember everything that you say.
You did an excellent job. Yes. All of our students who are returning to campus and residents are asked to take 2 tests within a 7-day period. And that varies based upon whether any student is coming from an international location or a student who is living in the United States at that time period. We will work with all students based upon your travel plans to make sure that we can get you a test ahead of time if that is possible. Otherwise, we will ask you to take your first test when you first arrive here on campus. And all of the testing costs per Dr. White earlier today will be covered by DePauw. So that will not be a barrier to you as you are coming. I hope I'm looking at both Amanda and Lufti to make sure that I got everything in there that I needed to get in there on that. So correct me if I'm not.
Well, there was a part of the question was if the 2 tests result in a negative.
Why is the quarantine staying?
Yeah.
Yes. So right now we are following the CDC guidance as it relates to travel. They still have an international travel restriction for folks. And I know that that seems odd given that there are other countries around the world who seem to be handling the virus better than we are. We are going to continue to monitor that, and that if it changes along the way, we're going to change our recommendations in that space. So know that we are keeping an eye to that, and that it is a concern for folks. We don't want you to be unnecessarily apart from other individuals on our campus, but we also want to make sure that we're following guidance from the CDC.
The next question, the United States Immigration Office says that to be eligible for OPT, an F1 student must have been taking a full course of study for 1 full academic year in the United States. If I were to take online classes from outside the US in the fall, would it count toward being enrolled, or is being inside the US during this fall academic year an essential part? So according to the fall 2020 guidance, continuing students are able to, remain in status while taking online courses either inside or outside the United States. This means that your OPT eligibility will not be affected. So this is a good thing. So please don't worry about OPT eligibility as long as you remain in good standing, meaning you're taking full course load for the full semester.
A final note to that question, please don't forget what we shared earlier about you still need to apply for OPT from within the US. And as part of your OPT application, you have to provide the US address. Our next question comes again from a senior. If as a senior, the university is unable to provide us with housing, will our I-20 permit us to travel back from our country to the US so that we may remain within the US during our online semester? The answer is yes. According to the SCVP guidance from July 14th and 25th, which was coordinated with the US Department of State, that's the government agency that issues visas, and US Customs and Border Protection, which is actually the agency officials that make the final determination of your admissibility to the US, and you meet at the port of entry. As a returning student to DePauw, you're eligible to travel back, even if you take fully online coursework. Please make sure that you have both the basic recommended documents that we shared earlier on you and the additional documents due to COVID-19 that we recommend that you have on you. Again, when I say have on you, please don't put them in your checked-in luggage. You should have them in your carry-on or on you. Another final note for seniors, you are eligible to travel back to the US as long as your I-20 hasn't expired and your program end date as listed on your I-20 hasn't come. So try not to travel in the last possible moment. If you decide to travel after the program end date on the I-20, you will not be able to return to the US because there is a grace period over there that you're allowed to stay in the US after the completion of your program, but that time applies for only people who are preparing to leave. That is not a time that you can travel back to the US from abroad. We also had a few additional questions submitted, so shortly before the start of this meeting, so we'll go through them one by one now.
Sounds good. Okay. I am living in the States and working for a summer internship which ends August 15 and have no place to live after August 15. So I need to come back to campus as soon as possible. Would DePauw help me in this matter? Or as usual, should I not have any expectation from DePauw? So what I will say is, I will encourage the students to please communicate with us. Please send us an email. And I know that all my colleagues will do their best to accommodate, if there is a possibility, we're going to be sure to help you. So I encourage the students to please email us and let us know, all the details and, when they're going to be coming to campus and everything else. And whether they're taking courses in the fall, we need to know as much information as possible.
Our next question was, as an international student, would I be able to become a commuter student for fall 2020? I think VP Alan Hill or Dean Julia Proctor might be better suited to answer that. Would one of you please?
I could start. We made a decision, the trustees approved that we would relax our residential policy during the fall semester only. That would allow students to commute those from their primary domicile, the home of their parents, and or students who elect to live in apartments, things. And so certainly you have that option. One of the things, if you're going to make that decision, and Amanda may want to speak to this as well, but if you're going to make that decision, you need to think about, one of the things that happens is, are you in a space that's also going to allow you to quarantine and or isolate yourself when you're making that decision of where you're going to live? Also, we want to make sure students don't get caught with trying to sign a full year lease when, again, we've only made a decision for only the fall term only. Amanda, is there anything else you want to cover, Julia?
No, I think that covered it.
We have another question that's asking whether do juniors get pass-fail options similar to those from spring 2020? If not, what would pass-fail look like? Perhaps Dr. Burke can address this one.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I actually saw 3 academic questions in the chat, so maybe I'll do them all at once if that's okay. So our faculty curriculum committee is currently discussing what pass-fail options will look like for the fall. They've not made a final recommendation to the faculty yet, but based on the conversation, I'm confident that we'll have extra flexibility for pass-fail compared to our normal policies. However, I'm not sure that the policy will be as flexible as it was last spring. So for example, they may say that you could take up to 2 of your courses pass-fail rather than all 4 of your courses. So short answer is that it's being discussed, and we will have an answer as soon as we can, but I can't promise it on a specific date. The other 2 academic questions I saw, one was, what are we doing to make sure that our classrooms are as safe as possible, or at least as low risk as possible in terms of keeping people, keeping COVID-19 practices in mind as we enter the classroom space. So we will be observing 6 feet of social distancing in all of our classroom and laboratory spaces. We will have a mask policy in all of our classroom and laboratory spaces, and there won't be, physical contact even in classes that would normally maybe have some physical contact in them. What that means, of course, is if you think about 6 feet of social distancing in some of our typical classrooms, it means not nearly as many students can fit into a class, which is why we're using some hybrid teaching methodologies. And we'll also be conducting some of our classes in spaces that we don't usually use for teaching, like the Union Ballroom, the social center at the Inn, the 2 movie theaters that are across the street from the Inn at DePauw. And we actually are in the process of constructing 6 outdoor tents that we'll be able to use for classes, at least during the warmer part of the term. And then the final question I saw had to do with laboratory sciences. It was from a student who is a biochem major and needs certain lab courses in order to progress in the major. The faculty are revising their course offerings, especially 300 and 400 level course offerings. If you look at the schedule of classes anytime after Thursday, 5 p.m. Eastern time, you may see that instructional modes have changed for some courses from face-to-face to either mixed or remote. And in those cases, faculty members may be finding ways to incorporate virtual laboratories. If you have questions about a specific lab course, you should reach out to the professor who's teaching that course.
So there was a question about CPT and OPT, and I think we mentioned it, and I just want to, so that students are 100% clear. So you can engage in OPT and CPT from outside the US. Applying for OPT has to be in the US until we hear some new guidance. So just wanted to remind students.
We also have a question about what will happen if the fall shuts down before November 20th. I think Dean Proctor might be better suited to address this one.
Yes, I saw a question too, and I think a similar question about if borders closed, due to the virus, can we rely on DePauw to allow international students to stay on campus like we did in the spring? Yes, we will ensure that students who are unable to, who face significant barriers to being able to travel, who have home situations where they do not have stable internet or places where they have private spots to study, who have poor internet connections, food insecurity, or other situations that just make their learning ability challenging, we will ensure that those students are able to stay on campus. Our goal, though, in all of the planning efforts that we have made is to mitigate the risk of spread to the extent that we might not have to depopulate campus like we did in the spring. That has been at the forefront of our planning, and some of the reasons why, and one of the primary reasons why we have de-densified campus, so we can put ourselves in the best position to not have to ask students to leave on short notice like we did, and like other institutions did this spring when we first started seeing the spread of the virus throughout the country. So we absolutely will ensure that students who have need will be prioritized for staying on campus, both if we should have to depopulate and after the conclusion of the in-person semester on November 20th.
I think it's important for us to mention here from immigration perspective that the newest guidance says that you continue to remain in status and you can stay in the US even if that happens. Previous guidances had other things to say on this, but currently you can remain in the US. We also had a very specific question whether Pakistan is one of the restricted countries. No, Pakistan is not part of any of the current presidential proclamations. However, again, I would like to remind everybody that it's based not on where you come from, but where you've been in the last 14 days for all of those proclamations. So you should be careful when you're choosing transiting countries or staying even just for a few days in some countries. The final determination of whether you are admissible in the US is always, as always, done by the US CBP officer at the port of entry. So having a US visa does not generally guarantee re-entry, but that's why we're also advising you to be a bit more conservative and have full documents with you and be ready to answer some additional questions given the adjustments due to COVID-19 that you've had to make. With this, I would like to invite any of the other panelists, if you had questions that were asked personally to you and you didn't have a chance to address, now might be a good time to address them. And if any of our other participants have questions that they haven't asked and we haven't touched on, please feel free to put those in the chat.
So there is a question that a student asked twice, and she also sent me an email. The student is asking if, as a senior, and can she graduate a semester early? And can she do that while taking classes remotely?
So I'll answer that from an academic perspective, but then Lutfi and Joanna, I'll rely on you to answer if there's anything different from the perspective of the student being international. So if this student meets all of her graduation requirements by December, even though those final set of courses are remote, if they're taken through DePauw, absolutely it's possible to graduate early. I would highly recommend that the student asks her advisor to take a look at the advising transcript to make sure that there's agreement about whether or not the graduation requirements are going to be met. But we do offer a December graduation date, and even if those final set of courses are done remotely, if all the requirements are met, the student would be eligible for graduation. And I'll turn to you if there's anything special for an international student in that regard.
So, as we mentioned, as long as the student is taking a full course load, whether it's remote or a mix, they would be fine and they can graduate. I think the only thing to consider is being remote. Applying for OPT might be tricky, especially if the student is planning to apply for OPT. So we need to have a conversation to have a good plan if the student is thinking of OPT application.
Also, if you're sure that you're completing the degree requirements ahead of time, so you've had already the conversation with your academic advisor, make sure to notify us so we shorten your program in Civis. There's a simple form available at the ISS Forms and Documents website for you to fill out and get your academic advisor approval, which will result in us updating your graduation date on your I-20. Earlier in the chat, we shared the link to ISS Forms and Documents website. The form is called Request to Shorten or Extend Program. Also keep in mind that not only location for applying to OPT, but the application window for OPT will move if you're graduating early, because the government is counting it. You can apply up to 90 days before you complete your degree, and up to 60 days after you complete it. So obviously that will move with your graduation date.
There, I think a couple of students had the question about if students choose to live outside of DePauw campus or study remotely, whether their financial aid package might be affected. Could someone answer that?
I'll take that question. I would encourage all of those students with questions about their specific financial aid package to reach out to financialaid@depauw.edu and ask the questions of that staff, because each individual student's package is unique to their family's financial situation and to where the situation of where they will be residing. There is also a difference between whether students decide to reside at home with family members or if they are living independently in a place where they will pay rent. And financial aid takes all of the information into consideration. So I would encourage you to, again, the email address is financialaid@depauw.edu. I know I've gotten some emails from students within the last several days with that same question and sharing that information with them as well.
Thank you. There is a question about study abroad. If I have a study abroad for spring and I take classes remotely outside the country for fall, how will my visa status be affected? So the first thing I want to say is visa does not affect status. I-20 affects status. Visa is to enter the United States. Valid I-20 and valid passport is your status. So if you're outside the US during the fall semester, as long as you're taking the courses that you need, you're taking full course load for the fall semester, you're fine with DePauw, you're fine with immigration, you are in active status. For your study abroad in the spring, you should work with the Hubbard Center, you should work with ISS. You need to apply and do everything that you need to be enrolled in the other university. But your status with the US with immigration is not going to be affected. If you need any travel endorsements are valid for 1 year. Just make sure that you are working, with the ISS office to get everything that you need. But there's really no restriction. Being outside the US, as long as you're taking your classes that are required, you're going to be fine. You can apply for study abroad, but you got to make sure that there is study abroad in the spring. We don't know. So working with the Hubbard Center is going to be very, very important. You want to read the next one?
I don't have a next one in my chat.
And it looks like we only have about 4 minutes. So if there's some last questions, folks, make sure that you get them in the chat before we say goodnight or good morning, depending on where you are.
Okay, there is a question about if the students need to move everything and empty their room at the end of the first semester. Can anybody please help with this question? Do students need to empty their room at the end of the fall semester?
Right, I think the student's asking, because we haven't specified who will be able to return in the spring, how they should plan at the end of the fall semester, since ideally they would be able to return to their room in a different time and year, but that may not be possible. So from a housing perspective, what might we recommend to students?
I'll take that question. The first part of it, I don't know quite how to answer for the students, and I'll be transparent in that we are still working on our plans for the fall term. Just announced our plans for the fall term, and as soon as students are back on campus, we will be turning our attention to planning for the spring term. What I can say to students, and we are preparing some communication from our housing and residence life staff about move-in, is that we are encouraging people to pack light. And this is for multiple purposes. One, due to our limitations on the number of individuals who can come along with you as move-in helpers. The other reasons are related to what we had discussed about depopulating. While we hope that we wouldn't have to do that, if there were the case, that we're encouraging all students, those students who might have to leave campus if we were to depopulate due to viral spread, to pack lightly. One that is a lesson that we learned from the spring term. And then because we have not yet identified and solidified our plans for the spring term, due to the virus being unknown and the unpredictability of its nature going into the fall and winter flu and cold seasons, that we don't quite know that answer, but I know that we will provide that to students in enough time for them to make plans for before the end of the fall term.
Dave, one last question for you. If there are going to be any changes to the graduation dates for the fall, students who are going to finish in the fall?
Changes to the graduation date for the fall? No, we don't anticipate any changes for fall graduation date. Now, there's no graduation ceremony in fall, but we do award diplomas at the end of the fall term. Those come in January, and we don't have any plans to change that date at this point.
Thank you.
For any new seniors this year, usually your visa will expire by then. You can't come back several months later on your F1 visa because you'll be eligible to participate in commencement activities in May. So you can apply for a travel visa to the US, and our office can provide you a letter to support your application. So if that's your plan to participate in commencement in May, send us an email closer to the start of spring term.
And I think because we're running out of time, I think just to tell students that we're going to collect all the questions and we will be sure to answering all your questions and we will get back with you. And I think with that, thank you to everybody.
There's one last question that was directly to me about DePauw and our annual tuition this fall to help and retain students. And I think it's a wonderful question to ask. I mentioned in the earlier Zoom calls that we weren't reducing our tuition because our professors will still be delivering their courses, our support services will still be available, and we want very much to retain our faculty and staff who support and teach DePauw students. And so unlike many other institutions who have laid off staff, furloughed staff, reduced staff salaries and faculty salaries, we've not done that at DePauw, and your tuition helps support all of those operational costs for the university. So I certainly understand the challenging financial circumstances all of us are going through, students, staff, faculty, and others. And so as was recommended earlier, given the financial circumstances for many families, encourage you to work directly with the financial aid office so that we can figure out the best way to support you and retain you here at DePauw.
I did want to add one last point as related to sort of this question on whether or not people could keep their stuff in the rooms and things like that. And Julia pointed out sort of the fact that, pack light. One of the things, as Dr. White explained, our hope is during the spring term that we're able to bring back a lot of students to campus. With that, we're going to have to go back through our whole sort of housing plan and redo that because everybody would not be in singles and those types of things. everything does clear up. And so, I mean, that's what our real hope is. Now, will that happen? We don't know. But so that's what we have to take consideration. We certainly will continue to discuss that and get back with you on that. But because certainly we got to think about some storage things and opportunities and things like that. But I just wanted to remind us that that's really our hope, is that we're able to invite more students back to campus, which would cause us to have to shift our spaces around again anyway.
The other piece is, and I don't know that we mentioned that here in this call, are the grants that we're providing to students. So for students who are upper class students, juniors and seniors, you will receive a $500 grant on your bill. I don't know the technicalities of how all of that works, so my colleagues will have to help me with that. But you'll receive $500 to help toward what we call professional development expenses. So fees if you're applying to graduate school or medical school. If you have an internship, that would help you with your travel expenses. If you need to buy clothing for an interview that you think could help support your professional development. So if you're an upper class student, you'll receive that. And any student who must learn remotely for a host of reasons, either choice or otherwise, would also receive a $500 technology grant. And you can double dip. So if you're a junior who's learning remotely, you would actually get $1,000. So that's one way that we're trying to help support our students financially.
So on that note, I think we'll call it a night. If there are questions that still have yet to be answered, I'm sure that we can answer those questions and make both the question and answers available, as well as the recording for students to be able to review later. And also, all of us are available with being able to support you and also clarify additional things as you begin to formulate your plans for the fall and tell us what they are. And we hope that things work out, and you never know. So even in the bleakest of times, there are opportunities to see small miracles and rainbows. And so I hope that's in all of our futures.
What a wonderful way to end. Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for being with us, as I said, this evening, this morning, or this afternoon, depending on where you are. And we look forward to connecting with you, whether it's in person or remotely. And we are all here and available to you as a resource. So good night, everybody.
Yeah, and thank you all.
Where I am. Right.
Thank you
Safe.
all
for joining us.
Dave.